Welcome back to Bedtime Historian, 9 p.m., where calm history stories each night help you unwind and drift to sleep. Tonight, we travel to a place that once shimmered like a mirage between two rivers, ancient Babylon, a city so hot that even its shadows seemed to melt. You can almost feel it now, the air thick with dust and honeyed smoke, the smell of baked clay and sesame oil. By midday, the streets glaze white, and the bricks under your sandals could fry a locust. You'd have lasted maybe 15 minutes out there before searching for shade or an excuse to move somewhere with a sea breeze. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease in to tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of the Euphrates, staring at a city that glows like a kiln. Its walls stretch high and wide, their blue-glazed tiles glittering with lions, dragons, and gods. The sound of the river is slow, heavy, like something half asleep. Between the walls, narrow lanes twist into the heart of Babylon, where merchants fan themselves behind stalls of copper bowls, dried figs, and lapis beads. The sun is merciless. Even the cats lie sprawled belly up, too tired to chase the flies. The Babylonians called their homeland Mat Akkadi, land between the rivers. But to anyone visiting, it might as well have been the land between sunstroke and sweat. Summer temperatures easily reached 45 degrees Celsius. Rain came so rarely that children could count the drops. You imagine the architects of the time, those quiet geniuses with reed styluses behind their ears, sketching on clay tablets ways to trick the air itself. And trick they did. Archaeologists have found that Babylonian homes were arranged around shaded courtyards, their mud-brick walls thick enough to trap the night's coolness. The city's planners knew that the wind, though scarce, moved predictably from the north and west, a daily exhalation from the desert. Their challenge was how to catch it. It's hard not to admire their stubborn ingenuity. Where most of us would buy a fan, they built one out of architecture. Some scholars even joke that the Babylonians invented Airbnb, air borrowed naturally. I warned you I'd slip in the jokes. Still, Babylon wasn't just a city of heat. It was also a city of rhythm. Each morning began with water drawn from canals poured over courtyards to settle the dust, and each night ended with the slow cooling of plaster walls that sighed like sleeping beasts. If you ran your palm along one, it would feel damp, almost alive. The entire metropolis functioned as a breathing organism. Its lungs, the thousands of small windows, alleys, and ducts that guided air through the maze. The most impressive spaces, of course, belonged to those who ruled. Within the hanging gardens, whether they existed exactly as described or not, the principle was the same: water and wind working together to make the impossible bearable. Palms rustled, vines dripped, fountains hissed, and from somewhere above, the faintest breeze slipped through lattice-work towers that caught the northern gusts. Archaeologists argue about many things, whether Babylon's wind towers came before Persia's more famous badgegears, whether they were purely decorative or part of a larger water cooling system. But standing here in your imagination, feeling that thread of air on your cheek, you realize they didn't need electricity to master comfort, only observation, patience, and mud. You pause near a wall engraved with the lion of Ishtar. The beast's mouth is open as if roaring against the heat. Around it, hundreds of small holes punctuate the brick, once perhaps vents or reed sockets. You tilt your head. A gust whistles through. Maybe it's coincidence, or maybe the city is still breathing. As night falls, Babylon changes costume. The sky turns the color of burnt copper, then slips into indigo. Torches bloom on rooftops. Somewhere, a flute begins to play, and the air cools by a single blessed degree. Families climb to the upper terraces to dine, talk, and watch stars shimmer over the plain. In those quiet hours, when even the Euphrates seems to slow its heartbeat, the ancient builders listened to the wind and took notes. Their experiment was just beginning. Soon they'd learn to shape air itself, to tame invisible rivers of temperature, scent, and silence, and all because they refused to surrender to the sun.
By dawn, the city still smolders with the memory of yesterday's sun. The first light spills over flat rooftops and turns the air pale gold. You wake to the sound of clay jars being lifted, a donkey braying, and the faint, rhythmic slap of women smoothing wet mud over walls. This isn't decoration, it's survival. In Babylon, the walls themselves are alive, breathing creatures that fight the heat for you. Every home, from merchant courtyard to humble hut, is built from baked mudbrick, adobe in the later tongue. The clay comes from the very earth the city rests upon, mixed with straw that crackles faintly when you press your ear to it. When morning winds brush past, these walls absorb the coolness like skin taking in dew. As the day burns on, they release that cool air slowly, hour by hour, until sunset. You run your hand along one such wall and feel its faint pulse, warmth sliding outward, coolness sinking in. The texture is rough, yet soothing, like the back of a resting animal. This is the architecture of intuition. No formulas, no air ducts, just generations of builders who watched how shadows crawled and how air moved. Some scholars call this passive ventilation, but the term feels too modern, too tidy for something born of desperation and trial. The Babylonians simply noticed that the desert itself offered all the clues they needed: shade, night, and the unpredictable gift of wind. They didn't fight the environment, they bargained with it. The technique was deceptively simple. In the morning, water was splashed onto the courtyard floor. As it evaporated, it cooled the rising air. Doorways were set facing the direction of prevailing breezes, north and west, while southern walls were thick and bare, resisting the sun's glare. A high reed screen might divide a room, not for privacy, but to slow and swirl air, creating miniature weather systems inside. To you, it feels almost magical, but to them, it was daily logic. You picture a craftsman squinting at the horizon, sensing where the dry wind carries the smell of bitumen. He knows which way to orient his door before he ever lays the first brick. That might sound poetic, but archaeology agrees. Excavations of old Babylonian homes reveal narrow, shaded alleys positioned like veins between houses, channeling wind downward into courtyards. Some even had angled roof openings, small enough to block the sun, yet broad enough to invite passing air. Of course, not everyone had the same comfort. The wealthy enjoyed layered courtyards, open to the sky above, but cooled by pools or fountains below. They even lined their inner walls with glazed tiles to reflect heat, their surfaces faintly shimmering like wet fish scales. Meanwhile, laborers' homes relied on mud alone, and the kindness of night air seeping through cracks. Equality, as usual, didn't extend to temperature. There's an odd charm to how the Babylonians treated air as something sacred. To them, wind was not merely weather, it was divine breath. The god Enlil, lord of the air, ruled storms and breezes alike. Perhaps it's no coincidence that so many temples were built high, as if to catch the whisper of his passing. Every breeze was both physical relief and spiritual presence. And so walls became shrines to patience. You could say Babylonian architects invented mindfulness long before the word existed. To cool a room, you had to wait for the earth to do its part. To shape comfort, you had to listen. It's ironic, in our era of air conditioners roaring like engines, silence was once the only thing that kept people alive. A curious discovery once puzzled historians: layers of fine dust found between plaster coatings in certain ruins. Some thought it was neglect. Others realized it acted as insulation, a primitive sandwich of air and clay that softened the day's blaze. That's the sort of clever accident no textbook teaches. And then there are the reeds, slender, flexible, and fragrant when fresh. They were used to line walls, ceilings, even furniture. When air moved across them, it whispered softly, the sound of Babylon breathing. At night, that whisper lulled children to sleep like a lullaby older than words. As the morning brightens, a boy climbs to the roof to feed pigeons. The heat hasn't yet struck. A faint wind brushes his face. It carries the scent of water from the canal and something faintly metallic, the smell of sun on wet clay. He closes his eyes and listens. To him, it's just air. To you, centuries later, it's architecture singing. And somewhere in the distance, above all those breathing walls, the first wind towers begin to rise, slender spines against the horizon, waiting to learn the same song.
By the time you reach the heart of Babylon, the sun is high enough to make the cobbles glare like mirrors. The city hums, the hiss of steam from cooking pots, the creak of carts, the murmur of traders arguing about barley prices. Then, above it all, you notice something new rising from the rooftops. tall, hollow shafts made of brick and plaster, their mouths facing the wind. At first glance, they look decorative, like chimneys that forgot their smoke. But these towers aren't for fire, they're for air. Each one catches the wandering breeze, channels it downward through a vertical shaft, and releases it into a shaded room below. You step closer, and a soft draft brushes your face, cooler than the air outside by a few precious degrees. It's almost eerie, like standing beside a giant invisible creature that exhales without stopping. These are the ancestors of what later Persians would call badgirs, or wind catchers, but in Babylon their roots were simpler. Born from the same trial and error instinct that shaped the city's breathing walls. Historians debate their exact origin. Were they Babylonian inventions, Persian refinements, or something shared by both? You'll find scholarly arguments that could last longer than a Mesopotamian summer. What's clear is that by the late 2nd millennium BCE, the Babylonians had already begun experimenting with vertical airflow. The oldest tower fragments found near Hilla, believed to be part of Babylon's outskirts, show narrow shafts lined with glazed brick positioned above storage rooms and sleeping quarters. Some even had thin channels running beside them where wet cloth or dripping water amplified the cooling effect through evaporation. You imagine the moment of realization, a builder noticing that when a shaft opened northward, it caught the wind like a sail. The air plunged down, cooled as it touched damp surfaces, then escaped through low vents on the opposite wall. Without ever naming it, they had mastered convection. It's something poetic about it, a civilization known for its ziggurats, monuments that climbed toward heaven, also built towers that invited heaven down to them. Picture a merchant's home near the processional way. Its roof is flat, open to stars at night. Rising from one corner is a square tower of mudbrick, maybe 3 meters high, its upper face carved with an open arch that mouths toward the northwest. Inside, the tower's core is dark, lined with smooth plaster. At midday, when the air outside feels heavy enough to chew, this simple structure performs a quiet miracle. Air glides down its throat, swirls past damp clay jars, and spills across the floor like invisible water. It's no exaggeration. The temperature might drop 5, even 10 degrees. Enough for a child to nap. Enough for a priest to read his tablets without streaking the ink. You step inside one of these rooms, ducking under a lintel carved with rosettes. The space smells faintly of dust, cumin, and wet reed. It's still hot, but breathable. In the corner, an old scribe sits cross-legged, stylus in hand, copying accounts of grain deliveries. Every few minutes, he lifts his head and closes his eyes, savoring the brush of air on his neck. If you asked him what cooled the room, he might shrug and say simply, "The gods are kind today." That's the thing. The Babylonians didn't separate science from spirit. Air was Enlil's domain, as we mentioned before, and his favor was courted through offerings and design alike. When builders raised these towers, they weren't just constructing technology, they were honoring the god of breath itself. Some texts even suggest wind-catching towers were adorned with small clay figurines of lions or bulls, guardians that kept the wind pure. Of course, archaeologists love to argue about that. Was the tower truly religious or merely functional? The evidence is fragmentary, the interpretations endless. But you suspect both answers are true. Practicality disguised as worship, worship disguised as practicality. Babylon was good at that kind of double meaning. And there's a little humor to it, too. Imagine the first homeowner bragging, "Yes, my house breathes, yours still suffocates." Ancient flexing at its finest. Over time, the towers multiplied. Palaces sprouted larger versions, some designed with 2 or even 4 openings, each facing a different direction so the building could inhale from whichever way the wind wandered. The system grew cleverer. Slanted walls within the shaft directed air downward, while heavy curtains at the base controlled flow. A Mesopotamian thermostat. When night fell, the process reversed. Warm indoor air, now lighter, drifted up through the same shaft and escaped into the cool dark. Without realizing it, they'd created the world's earliest form of air exchange, centuries before a single engineer used the word ventilation. If you stand in the right ruin today, you might still feel it. A faint current, ancient and patient, sliding through the broken mouth of a tower that hasn't served anyone in 3,000 years. Air remembers where it once belonged. And as you trace the shape of those old bricks, you start to see how one invention could reshape not just comfort, but civilization itself. Because in Babylon, survival wasn't about fighting the desert, it was about listening to it.
You rise before the sun, long before the first priest calls to the gods. The city is hushed. Only the soft clap of sandals on packed earth echoes through the alleys. From a distance, Babylon looks like a forest of towers, not of stone spires or bells, but of air itself. Each narrow chimney bends slightly in one direction, as if listening for the morning wind. It's tempting to think these were built by guesswork, a mason's intuition, a craftsman's superstition. But the deeper you look, the more deliberate the design becomes. These were laboratories of geometry, physics disguised as prayer. The builders understood pressure without knowing the word. When the hot air above the city expanded, it rose swiftly through the open mouths of their towers, creating suction that pulled in cooler air from shaded courtyards below. The result? An invisible loop of motion, a constant breathing pattern that cycled day and night. If you sketch it in your mind, it's simple, yet genius. Hot air goes up, cool air goes down. A living lung made of mudbrick and wind. Step into one of these homes again and notice the subtle engineering. The tower's top isn't flat, it's carved at an angle. Its north-facing mouth slightly taller, its southern lip lower. That asymmetry catches the prevailing northwestern breeze and accelerates it through the narrow opening, much like the nozzle of a flute. Inside, the air compresses, cools, and then glides down a smooth shaft until it sighs into the chamber below. A merchant might describe it as air that drinks water. Indeed, many of these shafts led toward shallow clay basins filled with damp reeds or dripping jars. When the wind met the moisture, it shed its heat in exchange for humidity. Evaporative cooling, the principle every modern air conditioner still bows to, discovered by people who cooled their beer with the same trick. There's a certain irony there. Babylon didn't just invent writing, they invented climate management. And still, we credit the Persians.
Scholars still argue the lineage, drawing lines between the wind towers of Babylon, the badgirs of Yazad, and the Egyptian Mulkoff. It's one of those polite academic brawls where everyone cites everyone else and no one ever wins. One school insists that true wind towers required cross-ventilation, openings on multiple sides. Another counters that Babylon's single-mouth design already counts, since the principle was the same. The debate might sound petty, but it hides a larger truth. Civilizations learn from one another through the movement of air, trade, and ideas alike. You crouch by the base of one tower. The bricks here are different, thicker, darker, arranged in a pattern that spirals upward. That twist isn't decoration, it's aerodynamics. The spiral encourages upward motion, a trick modern skyscraper engineers might quietly envy. The more you observe, the more it seems the Babylonians weren't guessing, they were experimenting. A tablet found near Uruk mentions a house that swallows fire. Some historians think it described a ventilated kitchen, cooled by a vertical shaft that drew smoke and heat away. Others think it was poetic language for divine protection. Maybe both. Either way, the principle of negative pressure pulling air upward was clearly known even if wrapped in metaphor. And there's the charm of Babylonian science. Everything they built was half physics, half poetry. A beam of wind could be both sacred and practical, a message from Enlil and a relief for your sweaty brow. It's funny how some habits persist. Imagine a Babylonian builder showing his apprentice the trick of angling the tower mouth 10 degrees west of north, so the god's breath doesn't miss your room. 3 millennia later, an architect in Yazad would give the same instruction minus the gods plus a compass. The science never died, it simply changed languages. You pause to rest inside one of these cooled chambers. The air here smells faintly of wet clay and sesame oil. A faint ripple dances over the surface of a water bowl, the invisible breath of the tower above you. Somewhere in the rafters, a dove coos, taking advantage of the cool draft. The beauty lies not in extravagance, but restraint. The builders of Babylon learned that the surest way to cool a room wasn't to overpower heat, it was to guide it, to make nature collaborate rather than compete. If modern air conditioning hums like domination, ancient cooling murmured like diplomacy. Outside, the sun climbs. Heat waves shimmer above the towers, but you hardly notice. The room remains bearable, its walls sweating gently, its air moving with slow grace. You understand now why the Babylonians built with such patience. Every brick, every angle, every vent was an invitation, not a demand, for the wind to stay. Some of the later poets would even say Babylon's towers taught air how to dance. It's a charming exaggeration, but standing here, in the hush of this living room of earth and breeze, you believe it. Because even without engines or wires, these people turned geometry into comfort and made the desert itself an accomplice.
By midday, the light on Babylon turns white and relentless again, the kind that makes the air quiver like a mirage. You drift through the northern quarter, where homes huddle close together, their narrow lanes a patchwork of shade and scent, clay dust, roasted barley, rosewater, and a hint of smoke from incense burned to keep flies away.
The towers above sway faintly in the heat shimmer, catching what little breeze dares to wander in from the plains. Not all towers, you notice, are built alike. Some rise from grand courtyards with smooth glazed brick, their openings rimmed with lapis blue tiles. Others are rough, barely plastered, leaning like tired sentries over cramped rooftops. In Babylon, even the air had a social class. You step into a merchant's residence, 3 rooms deep, centered on a sunken courtyard. Here, water drips from a narrow channel into a stone basin, its trickle echoing softly. Overhead, a wind tower mouths north, lined with reed mats dampened every morning by servants. The effect is immediate. The air feels lighter, cooler, scented faintly with moisture. You could almost nap here if you weren't constantly thinking of how someone figured all this out with nothing but observation, clay, and luck. In contrast, across the lane, a laborer's house has no such luxury. Its tower is little more than a vent, a slit in the roof lined with reed lattice. The family's comfort depends on timing. They sleep on the roof by night, inside by day, switching like migratory birds chasing cool air. Yet, even here, there's a quiet genius. The mother sprinkles water on the mud floor before sunset, sealing the day's heat under a thin skin of damp earth. When her children wake, their footprints are outlined in fine dust, evidence of a night's survival. Palaces, of course, exaggerated everything. The king's residence at the heart of Babylon supposedly had double-tiered wind towers, each connected by tunnels carved through thick walls. Air traveled like royalty, filtered, scented, and amplified by the echo of marble and mosaic. When foreign envoys stepped inside, they were greeted not with wine first, but with coolness, proof of Babylon's mastery over discomfort. Imagine the impression that left on traders from lands where sweat was as constant as breath. They command even the wind, one might have whispered. Temples, too, borrowed the trick. In the great complex of Esagila, dedicated to Marduk, narrow ventilation shafts pierced the ziggurat's massive core. Some say they were for smoke from sacrificial fires. Others think they carried air upward, keeping chambers dry and breathable for priests performing long rituals under torchlight. Either way, the principle was the same, a dialogue between structure and sky. But perhaps the most poetic use belonged to the libraries. Babylonian scribes guarded thousands of clay tablets, epic poems, contracts, medical recipes, star charts. The rooms that held them were lined with vents cut high in the walls, angled to let in wind, but not dust. The breeze passed over shelves of drying clay, preserving them from cracking. You could say the first archives of humanity were kept alive by the same breath that cooled its people. There's a charming contradiction here. A civilization that lived in one of the hottest climates on Earth, yet created spaces of surprising gentleness. Even in their prisons, small, vaulted, half underground, architects left air channels disguised as drainage holes, as if they believed that mercy, like wind, should reach everyone eventually. Of course, not everything was comfort and innovation. On the city's edge, poorer quarters clustered like cracked pottery. Here, wind towers were too expensive. Families relied on thin reed roofs and open courtyards. Some nights the air refused to move, and sleep came only when exhaustion conquered heat. But even then, they shared tricks, soaking cloths, sleeping near water jars, whispering prayers to Enlil for one small gust. It's hard not to admire how necessity made everyone in their own way an engineer. A clay tablet from the first millennium BCE records a small but telling law. Builders who constructed towers that spoiled the air of another's house could be fined. It's oddly bureaucratic, a reminder that even in the Bronze Age, zoning disputes were alive and well. Babylon cared about airflow etiquette long before apartment committees existed. By late afternoon, the city glows again in tones of copper and ochre. The palaces shimmer, courtyards darken, and the wind towers sing faintly, low, hollow tones as air rushes through. Across the rooftops, servants climb to hang new reed mats, adjusting angles for the evening wind. It's like tuning an instrument, one that plays comfort instead of sound. And standing there, you realize Babylon's genius wasn't just its invention of towers, it was the way it gave air a place in society. The rich tamed it, the poor shared it, and the gods, presumably, breathed it all the same.
Night folds over Babylon like a curtain of velvet and dust. The heat finally loosens its grip, and the wind returns, soft, wandering, scented faintly with baked clay and date wine. You climb a narrow stair to a rooftop, where oil lamps flicker beside sleeping mats and baskets of cooling bread. Above you, the wind towers exhale with a low, steady hum, turning the whole city into a choir of breathing chimneys. The Babylonians believed voices traveled on air, not just human ones, divine ones, ancestral ones, the murmur of gods between the stars. The same towers that cooled their homes were also said to carry whispers. When a night breeze moaned through a narrow vent, some swore it was Enlil speaking. Others thought it was the restless sigh of those who had died without offerings. Either way, air was never empty. In the temple courtyards, priests raised their arms to the sky, reading the movement of wind the way others read omens in smoke. If it blew strong from the north, it meant Marduk's favor. From the south, possible drought. From the east, danger, a storm or an enemy. You'd laugh, maybe, but weather and faith were inseparable in a world where one bad wind could erase an entire harvest. You lie on a roof beside a tower and listen. The sound isn't quite music, but it isn't silence either. Each gust changes tone as it slides through the angled brick mouths. A sigh, a whistle, sometimes a hollow drone like a distant flute. The people below are used to it. A child might call it the tower's song. A poet might call it the city's pulse. Some towers were even shaped for that reason, their openings carved in varying widths so the air would sing at night. Archaeologists have found ancient pipes embedded inside walls, possibly to stabilize wind flow. But maybe, just maybe, they were there for acoustics. Imagine Babylon falling asleep to the gentle hum of its own architecture. In stories passed down by scribes, the god Ea, lord of wisdom and water, taught men to capture the voice of the wind. The phrase puzzled translators for decades. Some think it refers to the invention of flutes. others, more romantically, to the rise of wind towers. And really, who's to say a house that sings isn't a kind of instrument? One particularly charming legend tells of a priest who, upon hearing a ghostly moan in the night, built a small shrine beneath his home's tower. He believed the voice belonged to his grandmother's spirit, returning with advice on when to plant barley. His crops, the tablets claim, never failed thereafter. Coincidence? Sure. But when you live in a land that depends on air, you start to treat air like an oracle. You can almost picture the rooftop gatherings, families reclining under woven canopies, telling stories while the towers whisper above. Someone strums a lyre, someone else jokes that if the gods wanted more prayers, they'd at least send cooler wind. Laughter drifts up, mixes with the sigh of towers, and together they make Babylon's lullaby. Even the city's guards claim to hear things at night. Along the walls, where watchtowers caught the desert wind head-on, strange notes echoed through the corridors. One inscription warned sentries not to mistake the wind that speaks for intruders. The line between natural and supernatural blurred easily in a world lit by torches and imagination. And perhaps that's the real beauty of these towers. They gave personality to the invisible. Modern life has sterilized air. It hums through vents, colorless and ignored. But here, air had mood, sound, even a sense of humor. One gust might slam a door like an annoyed relative. Another might slip down gently to kiss your ear while you slept. By midnight, the city is all murmurs. The wind towers continue their slow respiration, pulling coolness through bedrooms, pushing warmth into the night. If you close your eyes, it feels almost alive, as though the whole of Babylon dreams and exhausts around you. In that steady rhythm, somewhere between breath and breeze, lies the oldest conversation humanity ever had, between the world we build and the air that allows us to live inside it.
At dawn, the wind shifts again, this time from the west, carrying the dry perfume of date groves and distant dust. You can feel the change before you see it. The air no longer presses down. It moves with purpose, stretching across roofs, sliding through the mouths of towers and vanishing into shaded rooms below. Babylon inhales. And with that breath begins another story. Not of invention, but of inheritance. For nothing, not even air, stays still in history. The Babylonians weren't alone in their fascination with wind. Across the ancient world, ideas moved along trade routes just as freely as spices and copper. Caravans left Babylon carrying textiles, lapis, and the occasional builder or scribe. And along with them went the secret of comfort. The wind tower, humble and wordless, began its long journey west and east. Follow it, and you'll see how one idea reshaped empires. First came Persia. After Babylon's fall, the Achaemenids adopted its architects, its bricks, and its sense of cool dignity. They raised towers higher, giving them multiple openings, one for each cardinal direction. The Persians called them badgirs, wind catchers. You could find them above caravanserais, temples, and even ice houses, structures that stored frozen water harvested from winter mountains. Imagine that, using Babylon's breath to preserve snow in the desert. Further west, the Greeks and Egyptians watched closely. Herodotus once mentioned the houses of air in the east, marveling at how they stayed cool under cruel suns. Egyptian builders later copied the idea as malkaf, angled rooftop scoops that caught breezes from the Nile's northward flow. In Cairo's medieval quarters, some still stand, whispering through time like polite ancestors of Babylon's towers. To the south, Arab traders carried fragments of the technique across the peninsula. Omani forts and Yemeni hill towns began sprouting slender towers with arched mouths, each adapted to local winds. Some were even fitted with pottery flues to guide air into subterranean cisterns, an echo of those old Babylonian basins of dripping clay. And then came the Silk Roads, endless dusty arteries of exchange. As far east as the Indus Valley, homes began experimenting with passive ventilation. As far west as Cyprus, travelers described houses that breathed like sleeping beasts. Every culture added its twist. Persia refined, Egypt simplified, Arabia ornamented. But the DNA, that quiet Babylonian logic of harnessing air, remained. You might call it the world's first open-source technology. No patents, no blueprints, just observation and imitation. By the 9th century CE, Islamic architects carried wind towers into North Africa and Spain. In Cordoba, slender chimneys were carved into palace roofs. In Almeria, water channels ran beneath them for evaporative cooling. When you visit Andalusian courtyards today, those whispering arches and fountains are the distant grandchildren of Babylon's inventions. The same wind that once rattled date palms along the Euphrates now dances through olive groves by the Mediterranean. Of course, the idea didn't travel uncontested. Some scholars, rather patriotically, claim the Persians invented the tower first and that Babylon merely inspired it. Others point to Assyrian reliefs showing towered palaces, arguing the design existed long before Cyrus marched through Babylon's gates. The truth, as usual, is lost somewhere between pride and sand. Still, when archaeologists compare the core principles, orientation toward prevailing winds, vertical shafts lined with plaster, and evaporative basins below, the lineage is undeniable. Babylon started a conversation that other civilizations continued in their own accents. You can almost imagine a caravan master explaining it to a new city's masons. Build your walls thick, your roof open, your tower tall. Let the air do your work while you sleep. 1,000 miles away, another mason nods, not knowing he's repeating a lesson first whispered by Enlil's breeze over the Euphrates. Even centuries later, as empires rose and fell, the towers kept spreading. Cairo adopted them, Yazd perfected them, Dubai resurrected them in glass and steel. In a sense, the wind never stopped traveling. It just changed its wardrobe. What's fascinating is how this single wordless technology carried not just comfort, but philosophy. Each culture that borrowed it also inherited a belief that nature isn't an enemy to be conquered, but a partner to be persuaded. That lesson began here, in Babylon's sweltering courtyards, with one city that dared to listen to air. And tonight, as the same desert breeze still curls over those ancient ruins, you realized Babylon's greatest monument wasn't its walls, nor its ziggurat, nor even its gardens. It was this, an invisible architecture still breathing across continents.
Centuries pass, and the towers begin to crumble. The Euphrates shifts its course, leaving the old city thirsty. Sand reclaims the courtyards where fountains once shimmered, and reeds sprout from what used to be tiled floors. Babylon, that vast machine of mud and breath, falls silent. You walk among the ruins, the air thick and motionless. The towers are ghosts now, half-collapsed chimneys staring at the sky with broken mouths. Once, they caught the wind like cupped hands. Now, they swallow only silence. Empires that rose after Babylon rarely cared for its subtleties. The Persians refined the design, yes, but when later conquerors arrived, Macedonians, Parthians, Romans, they came with new materials, new aesthetics, and perhaps new arrogance. Stone replaced clay, monument replaced mindfulness. Why coax air when you can command it with marble corridors and slaves fanning the hall? As cities grew, people forgot to listen to their own buildings. The old techniques of breathing architecture faded into myth. Builders stopped aligning their homes with wind, stopped soaking courtyards at dawn, stopped believing that walls could be alive. Babylon's wisdom, like its bricks, dissolved back into the earth. And yet the traces never truly vanished. When first archaeologists uncovered these ruins in the 19th century, they noticed something odd. Shafts running through the remains of walls, angled vents too deliberate to be random. For decades they puzzled over them. Smoke flues, one said. Rain drains, said another. It wasn't until the discovery of Persia's intact bodgirs that the truth clicked. Babylon had been cooling itself all along. There's something humbling about that realization. We like to think progress moves in straight lines, but history loves circles. The Babylonians learned to tame the desert, then we forgot, and now, thousands of years later, we are rediscovering the same breath they once courted. You picture a ruined tower at sunset, its mouth facing north as it always did. The air still moves faintly inside, whistling through cracks. Not enough to cool a room, but enough to remind you that the desert remembers. The sound is almost like sighing, as though the earth is disappointed we stopped listening. Inside what was once a palace courtyard, you find remnants of blue-glazed bricks reflecting the fading light. Nearby lies a fragment of tablet, cuneiform, still etched into its surface. The words are unreadable now, but perhaps once they described the art of catching wind, or perhaps just a record of how many bricks it took to build a dream. Either way, the message endured longer than the men who wrote it. As the sun lowers, you realize the city's fall wasn't just physical, it was philosophical. Babylonians' builders believed in cooperation with nature. Later civilizations believed in dominance. For centuries, architecture became a symbol of power, not harmony. And in that shift, something essential slipped away: the intimacy between human breath and the planet's own breath. It's an irony fit for Babylon's gods. The city that once invented the art of breathing would one day suffocate under its own ambition. The decline wasn't immediate. The towers lingered in smaller towns, then in memories, then in proverbs. To live without wind is to live without wisdom, one old saying went. But by the time the canals silted and the walls collapsed, even the proverbs faded. Only the wind kept faith. You imagine the last inhabitant, a potter perhaps, closing his shutters one final evening, listening to the faint moan of air through his tower, unaware that his small comfort would one day become a mystery to archaeologists. He sleeps, the breeze washes over him, and Babylon exhales for the last time. Then, for millennia, silence. The towers stand half-buried until explorers stumble upon them, dusty and eroded, but stubbornly upright. A few bricks still smell faintly of bitumen when the rain hits. It's as though the city has been waiting, patiently, for the world to remember that cooling doesn't need conquering. And as you stand there now, modern, overconfident, air-conditioned, you feel a flicker of envy. Babylon didn't have our machines, yet it lived comfortably in its own climate. You, for all your gadgets, still chase the same invisible thing they caught with clay. Maybe that's the quietest kind of victory, a civilization so attuned to nature that even in ruin, its buildings can still breathe.
Morning light spills once more across the ruins of Babylon, gentle this time, less a glare than a memory. You stand where the wind towers once stood proud, feeling the faint desert breeze trace over your skin, and realize something quietly profound. The ancients weren't trying to dominate their environment. They were learning how to listen to it. That's the secret modern engineers are rediscovering now. In laboratories and universities, researchers study the remains of these towers, scanning every brick with lasers, mapping airflows in digital models. What they find astonishes them. The principles are astonishingly efficient, self-regulating, energy-free, elegant in their simplicity. A team in Iran once rebuilt a Babylon-style tower on a modern house. Without a single fan or motor, the interior stayed 5 to 10 degrees cooler than the outside. The same miracle that let scribes in clay-walled rooms survive the Mesopotamian noon. Architects from Dubai to Arizona are now adapting these designs. Passive cooling shafts, cross-ventilation corridors, roofs that drink the wind. Some call it biomimicry. Others, more poetically, call it archaeology reborn. And isn't that something? After 4,000 years, humanity finally circles back to what mud-brick masons already knew, that comfort doesn't require conquest. It just requires cooperation. You picture a modern city, glass towers shimmering in the heat, and imagine Babylon's wisdom breathing through them. Skyscrapers that inhale at dawn and exhale at dusk. Courtyards designed not for spectacle, but for stillness. Architects sketching lines that honor the same compass points their ancestors watched with bare feet in the dust. There's a quiet rebellion in this return to ancient ideas. In a world roaring with engines and climate anxieties, Babylon's answer feels almost radical in its gentleness. Why fight the sun when you can redirect it? Why silence the wind when you can invite it to sing? Scholars still debate where the first wind tower truly appeared, in Babylon, in Persia, or perhaps in forgotten villages now swallowed by sand, but debates miss the point. The genius wasn't who invented it, but how it was invented, through patience,
observation, and trust in invisible things. That's something modern technology, for all its brilliance, often forgets. When you think about it, those towers were more than architecture. They were philosophy in brick, a worldview baked into clay. The belief that survival and serenity could coexist, that even in the harshest desert, comfort could be coaxed rather than forced. You walk once more through what remains of the city. Cracked bricks, shimmering mirages, the soft hiss of air over old walls. Somewhere beneath your feet lies the memory of every hand that molded mud, every reed that cooled a room, every night breeze that whispered through the lattice and into a sleeping child's dream. And as the modern world hums on, the steady electric thrum of air conditioners and exhaust fans, a small part of you envies the silence of those towers. They worked with grace, not noise. Their song was wind, not machinery. Perhaps that's the real lesson Babylon left us. The future may belong to those who remember how to breathe. So, tonight, when you fall asleep, fan humming softly, window cracked open to catch a whisper of the world outside, you'll know you are sharing an ancient ritual. The same air that cooled a Babylonian scribe now drifts through your room. You inhale, it exhales, and across millennia, the rhythm remains unchanged. The air settles, and the story begins to fade. You picture Babylon now, quiet, moonlit, its ruins bathed in pale silver. The wind towers no longer stand tall, yet their shadows stretch softly over the plain. Somewhere, a single breeze curls through the empty courtyards, brushing against forgotten inscriptions. The city, though silent, still breathes. You take a long, slow breath with it. The same air, ancient, wandering, that cooled the scribes, the priests, the children asleep beneath reed mats. It slides across your face, weightless and patient, carrying the faint scent of dust and river water. Everything slows. The walls around you fade into darkness. Even the smallest sounds, the hum of a fan, the rhythm of your pulse, begin to melt into one steady current. The story becomes air. The air becomes rest. You imagine the old builders looking on, amused that you still chase the comfort they mastered with clay and faith. Their towers are gone, but their secret lingers in the hush of every night wind, a reminder that peace isn't something you invent, it's something you invite. Now, let your breathing match the rhythm of the wind itself, slow, deep, and quiet. The heat of the day has drifted away. The world is still. Babylon sleeps again. Sweet dreams.